Welcome to Job Search Insights. I'm David Barrow, president of Assist Staffing. Today's episode, what recruiters and employers are really looking for, is specifically for job seekers, especially those who are starting or restarting a job search in light industrial and manufacturing roles here in the Midwest. Interviews can feel intimidating, sometimes they feel unpredictable, and sometimes they feel unfair. You might leave thinking, I answered everything, so why don't I get a job? The truth is, employers aren't just listening to what you say, they're evaluating how you think, how you communicate, and how you've handled real situations in the past. So today, we're pulling back the curtain. Joining me is Nicholas Reichhardt from Seek Careers. Nick works with manufacturing employers and job seekers every day, just like I do. He has a front row seat to what makes candidates successful and what quietly disqualifies them. Nick brings extensive experience in staffing and recruiting in the light industrial space, and I'm excited to get his perspective today. Nick, welcome to Job Search Insights.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So let's just jump into it. Why interviews trip people up? Why do you think interviews trip so many capable job seekers up? What's going on there?
First, I would say that nerves, can get the best of people. I think that's one of the primary reasons. Everyone's nervous for an interview. They want to do the best they can. We're all human. We get nervous. A completely natural thing. I can't tell you how many times I've been nervous in an interview. It's just a natural thing. Doing calming techniques can help with that, breathing exercises, those kind of things. But I think another important thing is that, being prepared is a huge thing. You might be nervous just because you're nervous, but you can also think to yourself, am I prepared for this interview? Have I practiced enough in the mirror or with a family or a friend, just to get, the repetitive cycle of answering questions, having rebuttal answers, figured out kind of thing. So I think researching the company, practicing answering typical interview questions, but also advanced interview questions, knowing what your job history has been, specifics about those jobs, because, they're going to ask you those kind of questions.
That's great. Yeah, I think, interviews it's one of those few times in our lives where we have to sort of sell ourselves, what we do, how we do it, and, toot our own horn, as they say. And some of us are good at that. Many of us haven't had a lot of experience doing that. So it can be uncomfortable. But for the recruiter, the folks interviewing, it's an opportunity for them to get to know us, to get to know the candidate better, to understand sort of maybe the equipment they worked on specifically, the volume, the velocity, the speed that they're used to working at. As you said, the mirror, the sort of digital mirror nowadays is you can use AI or ChatGPT, where you can write a prompt that actually can coach you and be a recruiter. And we'll provide a link to a prompt that you can help set that up.
Awesome. I think that's a great tool.
Yeah, so let's talk about how interviews actually work today. What type of interviews do job seekers most often face in manufacturing and light industrial roles?
So most interviews, consist of phone screens first, followed by an in-person interview. They discuss, the three most recent jobs typically, and they receive a tour of the facility after that interview, and they'll look at a lot of their mannerisms as they're walking around, seeing if they're interested, seeing if they're asking questions, discussing certifications, skill sets, trade schools, asking if you know about this machine because you said you had it in your resume. So, putting making sure the proof is in the pudding kind of thing, hey, elaborating on the different skill sets you've had, what you did on a daily basis. Those things will just make you stand out that much more. But that's typically what we see for those types of interviews. Obviously, it's very common just to have like in office roles, you're going to have phone interview, you're going to have an in-person interview, possibly multiple of those. But yeah, so for light industrial and manufacturing roles, kind of like I was mentioning before, it's more elaborate. They want to see that you're interested, that you're showing emotion, that you're smiling, those kind of things. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's scenario based and
mhm,
behavioral based interview styles. But like you say, in the manufacturing world, there are many times a test of some kind, either,
mhm.
a paper based or a skills based. But then there's also this hands on test, like, here's a machine, show us that you know how to set it up. Um,
Correct.
yeah, have you seen that in some of your
Yes.
experience?
Yep. So that was another thing. Thank you for clarifying that. So we have some clients that use a paper test, to highlight the different machines and, different, let's just say, tolerances, whether it be a CNC machine operator, a welding test. We have those kind of tests readily available at our office that we can give candidates so then they can prepare for it. But otherwise, they're always changing up those tests too. So they want to make sure you're on top of your game, that you know what you're doing. But they also do, kind of like you mentioned, they do online personality tests and assessments to make sure you be a good culture fit, which is another big thing. I think we have another client that sends you a 30-minute online assessment, and they want to make sure you're obviously mechanically inclined. You answer these questions thoroughly, but it's also to make sure you're going to be a good fit personality wise, because they don't want to bring you in and have you obviously not get along with anybody. So I know that's another test that they do.
Yeah, we're talking about hard skills versus soft skills, and you're
Hmm.
talking about the personality test, and both are very important. You have to know the skill set needed, but also you've got to fit in with the team. And so you'll hear questions like, "Tell me about a time where you had to deal with a difficult personality or a challenging deadline." And this is where the recruiters are really looking to see that you have real life experience in these areas. And as you said at the top, Nick, the secret is to be ready.
Hmm.
And so preparing your answers beforehand, it's very difficult sometimes to think of an example to the questions that are coming. So it really does pay dividends to prepare in advance. And, if you get asked a question that you just don't have an answer to, I know what I've done in the past is I'll sort of steer the conversation to an answer I do have, and just to, show them a capability.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Hmm.
even admitting like, hey, that's a great question. Can I take a second just to think of a good answer? I think being honest and doing that
Hmm.
as well along with yours is something that can really help you stand out, because you're not just repeating something just to throw something back. You're actually taking the time to consider what they're saying, understand it, give you the best answer possible. I think too.
Yeah. All right. So let's dig a little deeper. What recruiters are listening for? So some of the things that there's answers to questions, but when you're listening to answers, what qualities are you sort of picking up on as you talk to the applicant, the candidate?
Yeah, I would say the top one is confidence. You're
Hmm.
listening to how they answer, if they show honesty, if they show their knowledge about their past, but also just smiling, confidence, sitting upright, not slouching, not being on your phone. I know that's a very common thing nowadays, but knowing that they're really like proving what is on their resume, because you can see that too sometimes where it's like the resume doesn't meet what they're actually
Hmm.
talking about. um, but so paying attention to the validity of the resume, if they're fluffing it just for fluff or not. Also reasons for leaving their positions, being honest, making it like if there was obviously some, let's just say, work drama or whatever the case was, being accepting, hey, it was a learning experience for me, maybe it wasn't a good fit, but I am looking to be a good fit somewhere else too. not just blaming other situations and those kind of things too. So.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I think what I hear you saying, just quite simply is, are you who you say you are, and do you have what we're looking for? One of the things that I really wanted to impress here today was, as the saying goes, time is money. And one of the things I'm looking for is to see how candidates value time. And, ghosting, as it's called, when an appointment's set up and someone misses it. This is quite prevalent in today's market where, you're expecting to be interviewing someone and you're ghosted. And so what I would just offer is it's just such a small thing needs to be done, just some clear communication like, hey, I have something that's come up, I can't make this, or whatever the reason is, but just a short note, email message to the recruiter to just say, hey, can we do this at another time? Because it keeps the door open, and you need all the friends you can get in these kind of times. So how are they presenting themselves, either virtually or in person? I've come across folks who have come to an interview literally in their pajamas, and not a good look. So are they dressed appropriately, either in person or virtually? Have they thought through the venue that they're interviewing from? Is there a lot of noise in the background that makes it challenging? Are they in a bad cell zone? Because many interviews I have are from a mobile phone. I would say probably 70, 80%. And so coverage for your phone is important to have. And have they read the job description to sort of say, hey, this is why I'm a good candidate for this? And then did they have strong answers? And then the sort of secret sauce is, did they have interesting questions? So answering questions the right way. Let's make it practical for our listeners. What makes an answer feel strong and credible to a recruiter?
Kind of tying into what you said before, having a different and elaborate answer, I think, goes a huge way. It's very credible. Like, obviously not only saying, hey, this is what I did in this, in this job, I worked with this and this. It's not going to make you stand out, and it's not going to make you credible. So elaborating, hey, I worked as a CNC operator and I worked on these machines, and this is kind of what I did on a daily basis, without them kind of elaborating, without them even asking those specifics. I think that shows that you're prepared. It shows that you're ready. It shows that you're eager and you're proud of what you've done too. I think that's a huge thing. People like to hear, oh, I was proud of this. Maybe, obviously I'm looking for a new job because of X, Y, Z, but knowing that, hey, I had success, I was proud, I knew what I was doing, I think goes a long way. So yeah, using examples from past employers and employment and being honest is what people want to see. They want to see authenticity, I think. They want to know that you're a human.
What I hear you saying is employers want real examples. What was happening? What was your role? What did you do, and what was the result? How did they specifically move the needle, and how far did the needle move? So really quantify the results. So, and another tip from the interview world is to answer the question, and no more, no less. Many times when we get in these situations and we're anxious or nervous, we sort of maybe ramble, but it's important to just answer the question and then move on to the next one. Okay. So the famous question, speaking of questions, tell me about yourself. Now, so let's talk about this question. Why is this question so important to you think, Nick?
I think it shows not only who you are, it shows your journey, your growth, what you pride yourself on, kind of as I mentioned before. Being excited and telling what you value shows a lot about who you are as a person and how you will fit into that company, your character, everything like that. I think when, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're interviewing someone, you're looking for those mannerisms, those keywords that they're talking about, because you're wanting obviously them to fit in your company. So if they're using certain language, a certain attitude to them about themselves, you can see how they would represent your company too. So I think that's a huge portion of that is, you know, being confident in who you are. Hey, like you mentioned before, not making it too long or too short, but just right enough to know that they know who you are as a person. I think it goes a long way.
Yeah. So it's not the time to give your life story.
Correct.
It's 2 to 3 minutes. And again, these kind of things are best prepared ahead of time.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and no bragging, just facts.
Hmm.
And it lets the interview sort of see you as a person and someone that they might like and someone that they will remember. So it's an important question, and preparing beforehand always helps. So first impressions. Let's shift to first impressions.
Okay.
What do recruiters notice in the first few minutes?
So as previously mentioned, they notice your attitude. They notice your smile, if you're smiling or not. How you're dressed, kind of like you mentioned before, your confidence, your preparation, and your honesty. Your attitude as soon as they walk in the door, as soon as you walk in the door, they're going to notice something about you. If you're eager, if you're polite, if you have a smile on your face, if you're like, hey, I'm really excited to meet you. Like, you know, those things make you stand apart versus walking in slouched, saying, hey, how's it going? Sitting down, checking your phone, those kind of things. It's the small things that really make the biggest difference between you and another candidate.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. You could overthink this question, but it's basic stuff. It's professionalism, it's manners, and being friendly, polite, articulate, are going to amazingly, but they'll make you stand out. And like you're saying, a smile, attentiveness. I've actually had people yawn during interviews, and so it doesn't take a lot to stand out. And it's really basic. So on the heels of that, some common mistakes. What do you see over and over again that you would really like some folks to sort of move beyond, but something that really disqualifies them pretty quickly?
You mentioned it earlier, rambling. You're
Hmm.
nervous. You're thinking in your own head. You're not even thinking about what they're saying. Sometimes you're thinking about how you're going to respond. You see that a lot in certain jobs too, even sales jobs, where they're like, you're not listening to what they're saying. And I've been guilty of it. You're not listening to what the questions they're asking or the
Hmm.
details they're giving you. You're just thinking about, oh, how do I look? How, is there anything on my face? Did I forget to, tie my tie tighter or whatever the case is?
Yeah.
Rambling, those things, you just focus on them. you know, like you said, be articulate, those kind of things. But also, a big thing is blaming others for past mistakes.
Mhm.
I didn't really have a good chance at my last job because my manager was out for me, or I made a mistake but it really wasn't my fault. Those kind of things. I think that is a huge portion of why employers are like, okay, well, if you're going to make a mistake here, how are you going to handle that? So I think blaming others instead of accepting, hey, maybe it wasn't a good fit, or I messed up on something, but I've learned from my mistake and I've grown. I think just being honest.
That's great. Yeah, and I think sort of paired with that is when asked the question, "Hey, do you have any questions for me, for us?"
Hmm.
For good questions, because more than 60% of the time, the answer to that question is no, I don't have any
Hmm.
questions. But what really stands out is a thoughtful question. For example, what will success look like for this position? Can I tour the area? Can I meet the hiring manager? What are the objectives for this department for this year? but just questions that make the interviewer go, this person has thought about this. They're thinking big picture. They're thinking very detailed. And again, having a few questions in your pocket for the company that's interviewing you, it goes a long, long way.
Right.
So working with recruiters, I want to reframe something. And recruiters aren't gatekeepers; they're partners. They're your advocate. They're the bridge to from interviewing to hiring. So, Nick, how should job seekers think about working with recruiters?
As your friend, as your foot in the door places. I don't know how many times in the past, when I was fresh out of college, that I was applying to companies directly. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But how many applicants do you think they see a day? You're not getting the chance to really prove yourself. And obviously, if you do get the interview and you do a great job, that's awesome. You go through an agency, you're interviewing with us as well as that company. We're telling them, hey, this is a great person. I just met with them. You're getting another sense. The company is getting another sense of how will this person be successful. Obviously, we've proven ourselves as a client of theirs, and them being a client of us. They trust us. So we're a foot in the door. We're helping you as much as we can. That's all we're here to do is help. Because, like I said, it's hard to get your foot in the door in some jobs that become available. Also, when they post them online, they can be gone like this, and so having a recruiter that's here for you saying, hey, I'm going to look out for some positions for you and getting ahead of the curve that way, also always a good thing. We're just always here to help is the biggest thing, I think. Whether it be rejuvenating your resume, helping with interviewing questions, we're here for those reasons as well, not just trying to get you a job and getting you out of here. No, we care. That's what we're here. Our tagline is here or servicing your success, and that's what we're here to do.
Yeah, and recruiters are there to make you look like a star.
Right.
And then what recruiters need to help you is timely, clear communication, doing what you say you're going to do, and that can really shorten the journey from application to hiring. All right, the final question. What one thing do you want job seekers listening today to remember?
I would say it's a couple of points, but mainly prepare and practice. Research the company. That's one of the biggest things I would do too, because I've been in interviews before where I didn't prepare as well as I should have. And they asked me questions, well, how much do you know about this company? And if I said nothing, they're going to be, okay, well, that's obviously not a good fit because they didn't even take the time to research our company, which, you mentioned it today. We have, these right at our fingertips. You can search the company before you go into the interview, but obviously I wouldn't recommend doing just that. I would recommend doing it beforehand. Be confident, be yourself. That's what they want to see. They want to see true authenticity. So that's what I would say.
I love that. Thanks, Nick. If you're listening today, here's what I want you to take away. Interviews are not about being perfect. They're about being prepared. Employers aren't looking for superheroes. They're looking for people who show up, communicate clearly, take responsibility, and bring a positive attitude. Those are things you can control. Preparation builds confidence. Confidence builds clarity, and clarity builds opportunity. If you're starting your job search, prepare real examples. Practice your introduction. Be responsive. Be reliable. Recruiters want you to succeed because when you succeed, employers succeed and our community succeeds. Nick, thank you so much for joining us today. And to everyone listening, we'll see you next time on Job Search Insights.